Most people would never look twice at a 1971 penny. It feels ordinary, almost invisible. But what if I told you that one quiet detail on this coin has made collectors stop, look closer, and sometimes pay far more than 1 cent for it? This video is about the 1971 no-mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin that millions of Americans have held in their hands, spent without thinking, or dropped into jars and drawers. On the surface, it looks like just another copper penny. But its story, its place in American history, and the small differences that matter to collectors today make it far more interesting than it seems. Let's start with what this coin actually is. The 1971 Lincoln penny is a 1-cent coin issued by the United States Mint during the final years of the traditional copper penny era. When a penny from this year has no mint mark under the date, it means it was made at the Philadelphia Mint. For decades, Philadelphia pennies usually did not carry a mint mark at all. That missing letter is not an error. It is a clue. To understand why this coin exists, we need to step back into the early 1970s. America was changing fast. The Vietnam War was still ongoing. The space race had already put men on the moon. Inflation was rising, and the cost of metals was becoming a serious concern for the U.S. Mint. Copper prices were climbing, and the government was starting to realize that making pennies from solid copper might not last forever. In 1971, however, the penny was still mostly copper. The composition was 95% copper, with the remaining 5% made of zinc. This gave the coin its familiar warm color and solid feel. It was heavier and more durable than the modern pennies we use today. In many ways, the 1971 penny represents the closing chapter of a long tradition that would soon change. The design of the coin had already been in use for many years. On the front, you see Abraham Lincoln's portrait, first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of his birth. By 1971, this design was deeply familiar to Americans. Above Lincoln's head is the word Liberty. To the right is the date, 1971. Below that is the phrase, "In God we trust." There is no mint mark, which quietly tells us this coin was struck in Philadelphia. On the back, the Lincoln Memorial dominates the design. This reverse had been introduced in 1959 and was still relatively new in historical terms. If you look closely, you can even see a tiny seated statue of Lincoln inside the memorial, making this one of the few U.S. coins where the same person appears on both sides. So what makes this penny special? Why would anyone care about a coin that was produced in huge numbers? The answer lies in condition, detail, and the small imperfections that turn an ordinary coin into a collector's piece. The Philadelphia Mint produced hundreds of millions of pennies in 1971. Because of that, most examples are worth exactly 1 cent today. But collectors do not chase average coins. They look for the best of the best, and for mistakes that escape the mint's quality control. One important factor is condition. A 1971 no-mint mark penny that is heavily worn, scratched, or discolored has little value beyond face value. But a coin that looks almost brand new, with sharp details and bright original color, becomes something else entirely. These are known as uncirculated coins, and they are far harder to find today than people realize. Even more valuable are coins graded at the very top of the scale. Pennies from 1971 that survive in near-perfect condition, with full red color and no major marks, can command impressive prices. Some examples graded at the highest levels by professional grading services have sold for hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Not because the coin is rare in numbers, but because perfection is rare. Errors also play a big role. During the busy production of pennies in 1971, mistakes happened. Some coins were struck slightly off-center. Others show doubled lettering, where parts of the date or words appear doubled because of a misaligned die. There are also pennies with weak strikes, clipped planchets, or unusual surface flaws. These errors turn a common penny into something unique. Collectors are especially interested in doubled die varieties, where parts of the design appear clearly doubled under magnification. These are not the same as simple wear or damage. True doubled dies were created during the die-making process and are considered legitimate mint errors. A verified doubled die 1971 penny can be worth far more than a normal example. Auction records give us a clearer picture of what this coin can be worth. Ordinary circulated examples usually sell for just a few cents or dollars in bulk, but high-grade uncirculated coins have sold individually for strong prices. Pennies graded in the top tiers have reached into the high hundreds, and in rare cases, well over $1,000. Error coins from this year have also sold for significant amounts, depending on the type and visibility of the mistake. Of course, value always depends on authenticity. With rising prices for top-grade coins, fakes and altered coins do exist. Knowing how to identify a real 1971 no-mint mark penny is important. First, check the weight. A genuine copper penny from this year should weigh about 3.11 grams. A noticeably lighter coin could be damaged or altered. Next, examine the details. The lettering should be sharp and well-defined, especially on uncirculated examples. Look closely at the date. Altered dates are sometimes used to fake rare varieties, though this is less common for 1971. Use a magnifying glass to inspect the surface. Genuine mint errors usually look natural, not scratched or forced. Color also matters. Original copper pennies often have a consistent red or red-brown tone. Artificially cleaned or altered coins may look too shiny or have unnatural colors. Cleaning a coin can actually reduce its value, even if it makes it look brighter. One surprising fact about the 1971 penny is how many are still hiding in plain sight. Because people assume these coins are worthless, they often remain untouched in jars, boxes, and old collections. Many uncirculated examples were saved by collectors at the time, but others were simply forgotten. Another interesting detail is that 1971 was only a few years before major changes to U.S. coinage began. By the early 1980s, the mint would switch to copper-plated zinc pennies to save costs. That makes the 1971 penny part of the final generation of traditional copper cents, which adds to its appeal. Collectors today love this coin not because it is flashy or famous, but because it rewards careful attention. It teaches an important lesson in coin collecting. Rarity is not always about how many were made. Sometimes it is about how many survived in exceptional condition. For new collectors, the 1971 no-mint mark penny is an accessible entry point. It is affordable, easy to find, and full of learning opportunities. For experienced collectors, it offers the challenge of hunting for top-grade examples or unusual errors. So the next time you see a 1971 penny, don't dismiss it too quickly. Turn it over. Look closely. Check the details. That small missing mint mark tells a quiet story of American history, changing times, and the fine line between an everyday object and a collectible treasure. Sometimes, the most interesting coins are not the rarest ones, but the ones we thought we already understood. And that is exactly why the 1971 no-mint mark Lincoln penny continues to capture the attention of collectors today. Most people would walk right past this penny without a second glance. It looks ordinary, almost boring. But under the right light, with the right details, the 1973 VDB Lincoln penny can quietly tell a much bigger story than its 1-cent face value suggests. This coin is the 1973 Lincoln 1-cent piece struck at the Denver Mint, identified by the small D mint mark beneath the date. It is part of the long-running Lincoln cent series that began in 1909, and by 1973, the penny had already been in Americans' pockets for more than 6 decades. Millions were made, spent, dropped, saved, and forgotten. Yet today, collectors still search through old jars and rolls looking for specific examples of this exact coin. To understand why, we have to go back to the year it was born. In 1973, the United States was going through economic change and uncertainty. Inflation was rising, the cost of metal was becoming a concern, and the U.S. Mint was producing massive numbers of coins to meet everyday demand. The penny was still essential for daily transactions, and the Denver Mint played a major role in keeping the country supplied with 1-cent coins. The 1973 D. Lincoln penny was made primarily for circulation. This was not a commemorative issue, and it was not marketed as special in any way. In fact, over 4 billion Lincoln cents were struck across all mints that year, with Denver producing a large portion of them. Because of this, most people assume the coin has no value beyond 1 cent. That assumption is where the story becomes interesting. Physically, the 1973 D penny follows the familiar Lincoln design that Americans had known for years. On the front, Abraham Lincoln's profile faces right, a design created by sculptor Victor David Brenner. His initials, VDB, appear subtly at the base of Lincoln's shoulder. The date 1973 sits to the right of Lincoln, and just below it is the small D mint mark showing it was struck in Denver. The back of the coin features the Lincoln Memorial, which replaced the earlier wheat ears design in 1959. The memorial is detailed enough that, with sharp strikes, you can even see a tiny statue of Lincoln sitting inside. Around the memorial are the words United States of America and 1 cent, with E pluribus unum above. The metal composition is another important detail. The 1973 D penny is made of 95% copper and 5% zinc, weighing about 3.11 grams. This is significant because just a few years later, in the early 1980s, the mint would change the penny's composition to mostly zinc with a thin copper coating. That makes Pennies 1,982 copper pennies, including the 1973 D, especially appealing to collectors who value traditional copper cents. So why would anyone consider this penny rare or valuable? The answer is condition and errors. While most 1973 D pennies are extremely common in worn condition, truly high-quality examples are much harder to find. Pennies circulate heavily. They get scratched, bent, discolored, and worn down quickly. Finding one from 1973 that still looks nearly perfect, with full detail and original luster, is surprisingly difficult. Coins that survive in uncirculated condition, especially those graded by professional grading services, can bring meaningful premiums. A typical circulated 1973 D penny is usually worth 1 to 3 cents, but an uncirculated example with strong detail and bright copper color can sell for several dollars. In top condition, graded as M-66 or higher, some examples have sold at auction for $20, $40 or more, depending on eye appeal and demand at the time. Errors are where values can rise even further. During the early 1970s, the mint was striking coins at a rapid pace, and mistakes did happen. Some 1973 D pennies show doubled die features, where letters or numbers appear slightly doubled due to a misaligned die during production. Others may have off-center strikes, clipped planchets, or unusual die cracks. A genuine doubled die example, especially one with visible doubling on "In God We Trust" or the date, can be worth significantly more than a normal coin. Verified error coins have sold for anywhere from $50 to several $100s, depending on the strength of the error and overall condition. These are not everyday finds, but they do exist, and collectors actively search for them. There are also stories of 1973 pennies with unusual coloration or strike quality that catch collectors' attention. While the famous aluminum penny experiment happened in 1974, not 1973, rumors still circulate about unusual 1973 cents. This makes education important because not every odd-looking penny is rare or valuable. Knowing how to identify a real 1973 D Lincoln penny is fairly simple. First, check the date and mint mark. The D should be small and located just below the date. Next, weigh the coin if possible. A genuine copper 1973 penny should weigh close to 3.11 grams. A significant difference in weight could indicate damage, alteration, or a counterfeit. Examine the details with a magnifying glass. Look closely at the lettering, especially the date and phrases like "Liberty" and "In God We Trust." True doubled dies will show clear separation, not just blurry or thick letters caused by wear. The edge of the coin should be smooth, with no signs of plating or seams. Counterfeits of 1973 D pennies are rare because the base value is low, but altered coins do exist. Some people attempt to modify common coins to resemble valuable error varieties. That is why professional authentication is recommended for anything that appears unusual or valuable. One fun fact about the 1973 D penny is how often it appears in childhood memories. For many Americans, these pennies were the ones dropped into school lunch trays, arcade machines, or piggy banks. They represent a time before digital payments, when small change still mattered. That nostalgia adds emotional value, which is a powerful force in collecting. Another surprising detail is how copper content influences interest. With rising metal prices over the years, many people began saving older copper pennies, including those from 1973. While melting them is illegal, the intrinsic copper value has increased awareness and appreciation for these older cents. Collectors today love the 1973 VDB Lincoln penny, not because it is rare in the traditional sense, but because it represents a moment in U.S. coinage history. It sits at the crossroads between classic copper pennies and the modern era of cheaper metals. It is accessible, affordable, and still full of discovery potential. For new collectors, it offers an easy entry point. You can search pocket change, old jars, or bank rolls and realistically find one. For experienced collectors, it offers the challenge of finding top-grade examples or legitimate errors. That balance makes it appealing across generations. In the end, the 1973 VDB Lincoln penny reminds us that value is not always obvious. Sometimes it hides in condition, detail, and history rather than headlines and million-dollar prices. A coin that looks ordinary can still carry stories of the past, the economy, and the people who used it every day. So the next time you see a brownish copper penny dated 1973 with a small D beneath the year, don't dismiss it too quickly. Take a closer look. Because in the world of coin collecting, even the quietest pennies can have something interesting to say. Imagine finding a single penny in your pocket that looks ordinary, feels ordinary, but carries a story tied to one of the most dramatic years in modern American history. A penny struck during protests, political shock, and cultural change. A penny millions of people have handled without ever realizing what it truly represents. Today, that penny is the 1968 no-mint mark Lincoln cent, and by the end of this video, you may never look at one the same way again. The 1968 no-mint mark Lincoln penny is a United States 1-cent coin struck in Philadelphia. When a penny has no mint mark under the date, it usually means it was made at the Philadelphia Mint. In 1968, this was completely normal, yet this simple detail is exactly what causes confusion, curiosity, and collector interest decades later. To many people, it looks like just another copper penny. To collectors, it is a small historical artifact frozen in time. To understand this coin, we need to go back to the year 1968 itself. America was going through enormous change. The Vietnam War dominated the news. Civil rights movements filled the streets. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated that year, sending shockwaves across the nation. Trust in institutions was being questioned, and the country felt tense and uncertain. During all of this, the U.S. Mint continued its quiet job of producing coins for everyday use. Pennies were still needed for stores, gas stations, and payphones, and the Lincoln cent remained a symbol of stability in people's daily lives. The Lincoln penny design used in 1968 had already been around for decades. The front shows President Abraham Lincoln, first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of his birth. The designer was Victor David Brenner, whose initials appear subtly on the coin. By 1968, this portrait had become one of the most recognized images in American history. On the back of the coin, you find the Lincoln Memorial, a design introduced in 1959. This reverse shows the famous monument in Washington, D.C., with a tiny seated Lincoln visible inside if you look closely. One important reason 1968 stands out is because it was the first year the U.S. Mint resumed placing mint marks on coins after a short pause. From 1965 through 1967, mint marks were intentionally removed from all coins. The government did this to discourage coin hoarding during a time when silver coins were being pulled out of circulation. In 1968, mint marks returned. Coins struck in Denver received a D, coins from San Francisco received an S, and coins from Philadelphia once again carried no mint mark at all. That makes the 1968 no mint mark penny part of a transition moment in U.S. coinage history. The metal composition of the 1968 penny is another important detail. It is made of 95% copper and 5% zinc. This was before the U.S. Mint changed penny composition in 1982 to mostly zinc with a thin copper coating. Because of this, the 1968 penny has a solid copper feel and sound that many collectors appreciate. Over time, copper reacts with air and moisture, causing pennies to darken or tone. This natural aging can create beautiful colors, especially on well-preserved examples. At first glance, the 1968 no mint mark penny does not seem rare. Millions were produced at the Philadelphia Mint that year. Most examples found today are heavily circulated, scratched, or darkened from decades of use. However, rarity in coin collecting is not always about how many were made. It is often about condition, preservation, and unusual features. One reason collectors pay attention to this penny is because high-grade examples are surprisingly hard to find. Most people did not save pennies in 1968, and few were preserved in perfect condition. Coins that were never circulated, with full red copper color and sharp details, are far scarcer than the mintage numbers suggest. These top-condition coins are graded by professional services and labeled with terms like mint state, followed by a number indicating quality. Errors also play a role in value. While most 1968 pennies are normal, some were struck with mistakes. These can include off-center strikes, weak strikes, doubled details, or planchet flaws. A genuine error can make a coin far more interesting and valuable than a standard example. Error coins happened accidentally during mass production, and once they entered circulation, they became unique survivors of the minting process. When it comes to real market value, the difference between an average coin and a special one is dramatic. A typical circulated 1968 no mint mark penny is usually worth only face value or a few cents. However, uncirculated examples with strong red color can sell for much more. Coins graded in very high mint state levels have sold for hundreds, and in rare cases, thousands of dollars at auction. These prices are not because the coin is magical or secret, but because top-quality survivors are genuinely scarce and highly competitive among collectors. Auction records show that professionally graded 1968 no mint mark pennies in exceptional condition have drawn strong interest. Collectors often compete fiercely for the best-known examples because once they are locked into collections, they rarely return to the market. This creates demand far beyond what most people expect from a 1-cent coin. Of course, with rising prices comes the risk of confusion or misinformation. Identifying a real 1968 no mint mark penny is simple if you know what to look for. First, check the date. It must clearly read 1968. Then look just below the date on the front of the coin. If there is no letter, it is from Philadelphia. The coin should have the Lincoln Memorial on the back, not wheat stalks. The color should be consistent with copper, though it may range from bright red to deep brown depending on age and storage. Fake pennies are uncommon, but altered coins do exist. Some people attempt to change dates or remove mint marks from other coins. These alterations usually leave visible scratches, tool marks, or unnatural surfaces. A genuine coin will show even wear and natural aging. When in doubt, serious collectors rely on professional grading services to confirm authenticity and condition. There are also fun and surprising facts tied to this penny. In 1968, the San Francisco Mint began producing proof coins exclusively, which is why you may see 1968 pennies with an S mint mark that look mirror-like and perfectly struck. These were not meant for circulation. Meanwhile, the Philadelphia pennies without mint marks were made for everyday use, passing through millions of hands during a turbulent year in history. Another interesting detail is that many people alive today remember using these exact pennies to buy candy, make phone calls, or leave tips. That emotional connection adds a layer of nostalgia that collectors value deeply. This coin is not ancient or mysterious, yet it connects directly to personal memories and national events. Collectors love the 1968 no mint mark Lincoln penny because it represents a balance between history and accessibility. It is affordable for beginners, yet challenging for advanced collectors seeking top-grade examples. It tells a story of a nation in transition while remaining familiar and humble. Holding one is like holding a small piece of American life from over half a century ago. As interest in tangible history continues to grow, coins like this remind us that valuable stories are not always hidden in vaults or museums. Sometimes they sit quietly in jars, drawers, and old collections, waiting to be noticed. The 1968 no mint mark Lincoln penny is a perfect example of how ordinary objects can carry extraordinary meaning. So the next time you see a penny dated 1968 with no mint mark, pause for a moment. Look at Lincoln's face. Think about the year it was born, the hands it may have passed through, and the stories it silently witnessed. It may only be worth a cent, or it may be something far more special. Either way, it proves that history often hides in plain sight, and curiosity is what brings it to life. Most people would never look twice at a 1964 penny. But what if I told you that one small detail on this coin has turned ordinary pocket change into something collectors still hunt for today? This is the 1964 D mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin that looks simple at first glance, yet carries the weight of one of the most important periods in modern American coin history. In 1964, the United States was changing fast. The country was in the middle of the Cold War. President Lyndon B. Johnson had just taken office after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and Americans were saving coins at an unprecedented level. Silver coins were disappearing from circulation, and the U.S. Mint was under intense pressure to produce more coins than ever before. That's where the 1964 Lincoln penny comes in. This penny was struck to keep everyday commerce moving. Millions of Americans needed small change for newspapers, coffee, parking meters, and bus fares. The Denver Mint, identified by the small d under the date, worked at full capacity to meet demand. The Lincoln cent design itself was already well known. It had been introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, making it the first U.S. coin to feature a real historical person. By 1964, Lincoln's profile had been familiar to Americans for more than half a century. On the front of the coin, you see Lincoln facing right, with the words "In God We Trust" above his head, "Liberty" to the left, and the date 1964 to the right. Just below the date is the key detail for this coin, the small D mint mark, showing it was made in Denver. On the back, the coin features the Lincoln Memorial, a design that had been used since 1959. If you look closely, you can actually see a tiny statue of Lincoln inside the memorial, making this one of the most detailed designs ever used on a penny. The metal composition of the 1964 D penny is another important detail. It is made of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. This is the classic bronze composition that many collectors love, especially because pennies made after 1982 are mostly zinc. To some collectors, these older copper pennies simply feel more solid, more real, and more historic. Now here's where things get interesting. On its own, the 1964 D penny is not rare in everyday condition. The Denver Mint produced more than 3 billion pennies that year. That's billion with a B because of that huge number. Most worn examples are only worth a few cents, mostly for their copper content. But value in coin collecting is not just about how many were made. It's about condition, mistakes, and survival. Some 1964 D pennies were struck with errors, and those are the coins that collectors truly get excited about. These errors happen because the minting process was under enormous pressure. Machines were running non-stop, and quality control was not perfect. One of the most desirable errors is the doubled die. This happens when the coin design is impressed slightly twice, creating a doubling effect on letters or numbers. On a genuine doubled die 1964 D penny, you may see doubling in the date or in the words, "In God We Trust." These coins can sell for hundreds or even thousands of dollars, depending on how strong the doubling is and the overall condition. Another valuable error is the off-center strike. These coins were not properly aligned when struck, causing part of the design to be missing. Dramatic off-center examples from 1964 D can sell for several $100s. There are also clipped planchet errors, where part of the coin's metal is missing because the blank was cut incorrectly. These are less common but still very collectible. Even without errors, condition matters a lot. Most 1964 D pennies were heavily used, meaning truly pristine examples are surprisingly scarce. Coins that have never been circulated, with full original luster and no marks, are called mint state coins. A 1964 D penny graded in top condition by a professional grading service can sell for well over $100. In the highest known grades, some examples have sold for several $100s at auction. These are coins that somehow avoided decades of wear, scratches, and damage. Real auction records show just how much collectors care about quality. High-grade 1964 D pennies have appeared in major auctions, often sparking bidding wars among collectors trying to complete perfect Lincoln cent sets. So how can you tell if you have a real 1964 D penny that might be worth something? First, check the date and the mint mark. The D must be clearly visible below the date. If the coin has no mint mark, it was made in Philadelphia and is a different issue. Next, weigh the coin. A genuine 1964 penny should weigh about 3.11 grams. A significantly different weight could indicate damage, alteration, or a counterfeit. Look closely at the details with a magnifying glass. Check the lettering for doubling, especially on the date and the motto. Examine the rim to see if it's complete and evenly struck. Also pay attention to the color. Original copper pennies often have a rich red or red-brown tone. Dark, dull, or uneven coloring can indicate heavy wear or environmental damage. Be cautious of coins that seem too perfect or have unusual features without proper verification. Counterfeits do exist, especially for error coins. When in doubt, professional grading is the safest way to confirm authenticity and value. Here's a fun fact many people don't know. In 1964, because of coin shortages, the U.S. Mint actually continued producing some 1964 dated coins into 1965. That's how serious the demand was. This makes 1964 one of the most historically important years in U.S. coinage. Another interesting detail is that many Americans hoarded 1964 coins, believing they might become rare because silver coins were disappearing. While that didn't make regular pennies rare, it did help preserve some high-quality examples that collectors treasure today. Collectors love the 1964 D penny because it represents the end of an era. It comes from the final full decade of classic copper pennies before major changes in U.S. coinage. It connects everyday American life with a moment of national transition. It's also a reminder that value can hide in plain sight. A coin you might overlook today could be the very piece a collector has been searching for, especially if it has the right condition or the right mistake. So the next time you see a 1964 D Lincoln penny, don't dismiss it too quickly. Take a closer look. Check the details. Look for something unusual. Because in the world of coin collecting, history, rarity, and value often come from the smallest details. And sometimes, the most ordinary-looking penny has the most interesting story to tell. Imagine pulling a penny from your pocket that looks completely ordinary, yet it quietly holds a story that millions of Americans have unknowingly spent, saved, and overlooked for decades. A penny from 1994. No mint mark, no flashy shine, just Abraham Lincoln staring back at you. But what if this everyday coin isn't as ordinary as it seems? Today, we're taking a deep look at the 1994 no mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin most people have held but very few have ever truly examined. By the end of this story, you may never look at loose change the same way again. The 1994 Lincoln penny is part of the longest-running coin design in United States history. It features Abraham Lincoln on the front, a design first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. By 1994, this design had already been in circulation for 85 years, making it instantly familiar to Americans of all ages. When you see a 1994 penny with no mint mark, that tells us something important. It was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. For most U.S. coins made in Philadelphia, especially pennies, no mint mark was used. That small missing letter is not an error. It's a clue to where the coin was born. The year 1994 was a time of change in America. The economy was growing, digital technology was slowly becoming part of daily life, and cash was still king. Billions of pennies were minted that year to keep up with everyday transactions. Vending machines, parking meters, coffee counters, and corner stores all depended on these small copper-colored coins. The Lincoln penny of 1994 was made primarily from zinc, with a thin outer coating of copper. This change in metal composition began in 1982, when rising copper prices forced the U.S. Mint to find a cheaper solution. While the coin looks like solid copper, it's actually about 97.5% zinc on the inside. The front of the coin shows Abraham Lincoln facing to the right, with the words "In God We Trust" above his head, "Liberty" to the left, and the date 1994 to the right. The back features the Lincoln Memorial, which was used from 1959 until 2008. If you look closely, you can even see a tiny statue of Lincoln seated inside the memorial, one of the smallest detailed figures ever placed on a U.S. coin. At first glance, there seems to be nothing special about this penny. And in most cases, that's true. The majority of 1994 no mint mark pennies are worth exactly 1 cent. But coin collecting has never been just about the average example. It's about the exceptions. What makes certain 1994 pennies valuable are condition, errors, and rare variations. Most coins from this year were heavily circulated. They were dropped, scratched, stepped on, and worn down over time. Finding one in pristine condition today is surprisingly difficult. Collectors grade coins on a scale, and pennies from 1994 that survive in near-perfect or mint-state condition can sell for far more than face value. Some uncirculated examples, especially those with sharp details and original luster, have sold for several dollars at auction. Then there are error coins. Errors are mistakes made during the minting process, and they are where the real excitement begins. Some 1994 pennies were struck with doubled dies, meaning parts of the design appear doubled when viewed closely. This can affect the date, lettering, or Lincoln's profile. Other known errors include off-center strikes, clipped planchets, weak strikes, and die cracks. These errors were never meant to leave the mint, yet a small number slipped into circulation. To collectors, these mistakes are treasures. There have been documented auction sales where 1994 Lincoln pennies with clear doubling or dramatic mint errors sold for hundreds of dollars. While these are rare, they prove that even a modern penny can carry serious collector interest under the right conditions. It's important to understand that stories of million-dollar 1994 pennies are myths. Reputable collectors and grading services agree that normal examples are common. However, rarity is not always about age. It's about survival, condition, and uniqueness. So how can you tell if you have something special? Start by checking the date and mint mark area carefully. A genuine 1994 no mint mark penny will have clean lettering, consistent spacing, and no added marks where a mint letter would be. Fakes are uncommon for this coin, but altered coins do exist. Next, examine the coin under good lighting. Look closely at the numbers in the date and the letters in Liberty and In God We Trust. If you see strong doubling that appears raised and not just blurry, that could be a doubled die. Blurry doubling is often just wear or machine doubling, which is not valuable. Weigh the coin if you can. A genuine 1994 penny should weigh about 2.5 grams. A significantly different weight could indicate damage, alteration, or an unusual planchet error. Avoid cleaning the coin. Cleaning can destroy collector value instantly. Even a rare error coin can lose much of its worth if cleaned improperly. One surprising fact about the 1994 penny is how many were saved unintentionally. People often keep coins from their birth year or meaningful moments in their lives. Over time, these small personal collections become windows into history. Another interesting detail is how the Lincoln Memorial design marked the end of an era. Just 14 years after 1994, the reverse design would change permanently. This makes every Lincoln Memorial penny, including the 1994, part of a completed chapter in U.S. coinage. Collectors today appreciate the 1994 no mint mark penny not because it's flashy, but because it represents everyday American life in the late 20th century. It passed through millions of hands. It bought small moments. And in rare cases, it became something more. Coin collecting isn't always about finding instant riches. It's about curiosity, patience, and learning to see value where others don't look. A 1994 penny may not change your life, but it can change how you see history. So the next time you find a penny dated 1994, don't rush to spend it. Turn it over. Look closely. Ask yourself where it's been and what stories it carries. Because sometimes, the most ordinary coins are the ones that teach us the most. And who knows? The next time you check your change, you might discover that history has been quietly waiting in your pocket all along. What if the penny sitting quietly in your pocket right now is hiding a story almost no one notices? A story from a turning point in modern American history, stamped into copper and zinc. Today, we're talking about the 1991 no mint mark Lincoln penny. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary 1-cent coin. Millions of people have spent it without a second thought. But behind this simple penny is a moment in time, a change in materials, and a few surprises that still keep collectors looking closely more than 30 years later. The 1991 Lincoln penny with no mint mark was made in Philadelphia. That missing mint mark is not an error. It simply means the coin was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, which traditionally did not use a mint mark on pennies at that time. In 1991, the United States Mint was producing billions of cents every year to keep up with everyday commerce, and this coin was part of that massive effort. To understand this penny, you have to understand the year it came from. 1991 was a world in transition. The Cold War was ending. The internet was still unknown to most Americans. Gas was cheap, and people still used cash for nearly everything. Pennies mattered. They filled cash registers, jars, and pockets across the country, and the mint needed to make sure there were enough of them. The design of the 1991 penny is part of one of the longest-running coin designs in U.S. history. On the front, you see Abraham Lincoln, a portrait first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of his birth. By 1991, this image was deeply familiar to Americans. Lincoln faces right, with the words "In God We Trust" above him, liberty to the left, and the year 1991 to the right. On the back, the coin still shows the Lincoln Memorial, a design introduced in 1959. If you look closely, you can even see a tiny statue of Lincoln seated inside the memorial, making it one of the few U.S. coins at the time to show the same person on both sides. Above the memorial are the words United States of America and E pluribus unum, and below it, 1 cent. But one of the most important things about the 1991 penny is something you can't see at first glance. This was part of a major shift in how U.S. pennies were made. Before 1982, pennies were mostly copper. After that year, rising copper prices forced the mint to change the composition. By 1991, pennies were made of 97.5% zinc, with only a thin copper coating on the outside. That means the 1991 penny feels like copper, but is actually zinc inside. This change makes the coin lighter and cheaper to produce, and it also affects how it ages. Over time, if the copper coating is damaged, the zinc underneath can corrode, which is why some older pennies from this era look bubbled or eaten away. Now here's the big question most people ask. Is the 1991 no-mint mark Lincoln penny rare or valuable? In general, the answer is no, at least not in its normal form. The Philadelphia Mint struck billions of pennies in 1991. Because so many were made, most examples you find today are only worth their face value of 1 cent, especially if they show signs of circulation like scratches, darkening, or worn details. However, this is where curiosity comes in. Even very common coins can become valuable if they have something unusual about them. And the 1991 penny is no exception. Collectors pay close attention to errors and varieties. These are coins that slip through the minting process with something different or wrong. For example, some 1991 pennies have off-center strikes, where the design is shifted to one side. Others may show a doubled die, where parts of the lettering or date appear doubled due to a mistake in the die used to strike the coin. There are also pennies struck on the wrong type of metal, called wrong planchet errors. While rare, a 1991 penny struck on a foreign planchet or an older copper planchet would be extremely valuable, often selling for hundreds or even thousands of dollars if authenticated. Condition also matters. A 1991 penny that has never been circulated and still has its original red copper color can be worth more than face value. In uncirculated condition, some examples graded by professional services have sold for several dollars, and in top condition, sometimes more than $10 or $20, simply because so few survive without wear. At auctions and coin shows, you'll occasionally see 1991 no-mint mark pennies with errors selling for impressive amounts. A strong doubled die example can sell for hundreds of dollars. A dramatic off-center strike can bring similar prices, depending on how visually striking it is. These are real sales that show how even a modern penny can become desirable when it stands out from the rest. So how can you tell if you have a real and potentially valuable 1991 penny? First, check the date. Make sure it clearly reads 1991. Then look below the date. If there is no letter, that means it was made in Philadelphia. That part is normal. Next, examine the coin under good light. Look closely at the letters in Liberty, "In God We Trust," and the numbers in the date. If they appear doubled or unusually thick, that could be a sign of an error. Also check the coin's position. Is the design centered evenly, or is it pushed toward one edge? Weighing the coin can also help. A normal 1991 penny should weigh about 2.5 grams. A significant difference could indicate a wrong planchet or damage. Be cautious of fakes or altered coins. Some people try to damage coins on purpose to make them look like errors. True mint errors usually have smooth, natural-looking features, not rough or scraped surfaces. When in doubt, serious collectors send coins to professional grading services for authentication. There are also some fun and surprising facts about the 1991 penny. Many people don't realize that pennies from this era cost more to make than their face value. Even in 1991, it cost more than 1 cent to produce a penny, a debate that continues today. Yet the penny remains part of American culture, largely because of tradition and habit. Another interesting detail is that by 1991, the Lincoln Memorial design was nearing the end of its run. Just 17 years later, in 2008, the Mint would announce a major redesign. And in 2009, the reverse would change to new designs honoring Lincoln's life. That makes the 1991 penny part of the final decades of a classic look. Collectors today appreciate the 1991 no-mint mark Lincoln penny, not because it is flashy or famous, but because it represents everyday America. It's the kind of coin people actually used. It passed through grocery stores, gas stations, and lunch counters. It sat in change jars and piggy banks. It tells the story of a time when cash was king. For new collectors, this penny is often a starting point. It's easy to find, affordable, and perfect for learning how to spot condition differences and possible errors. For experienced collectors, it's a reminder that even the most common coins deserve a second look. So the next time you see a 1991 Lincoln penny with no mint mark, don't dismiss it too quickly. Hold it for a moment. Look at the details. Think about where it's been and how many hands it passed through. Because sometimes the most ordinary coins carry the most quietly fascinating stories, and the real value begins with curiosity. Imagine pulling a penny from your pocket and realizing it might not be as ordinary as it looks. A single cent, dated 1988, with no mint mark at all. Millions of people have handled this coin without a second thought. But some collectors believe a small detail on this penny could quietly turn it into something special. Today we're taking a close look at the 1988 no mint mark Lincoln penny. At first glance, it seems like a common coin from modern American history. But once you understand when it was made, how it was produced, and what collectors actually look for, this humble penny starts telling a much more interesting story. The 1988 Lincoln penny is part of one of the longest-running coin designs in United States history. The Lincoln cent was first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. By 1988, the design had already been in circulation for nearly 8 decades, and it was a familiar sight in every American household. When a penny from 1988 has no mint mark, it means it was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. For most of U.S. coin history, Philadelphia did not place a mint mark on pennies. That absence itself is not a mistake or an error. It simply tells us where the coin was made. In 1988, the Philadelphia Mint produced billions of Lincoln cents, so the date alone does not make the coin rare. To understand this coin properly, we have to go back to the late 1980s. America was in a period of economic stability. Everyday cash was still king, and pennies were heavily used in daily transactions. Vending machines, payphones, and cash registers depended on physical coins, and the U.S. Mint worked non-stop to keep up with demand. The 1988 penny was created for circulation, not for collectors, and that fact plays a big role in how it is valued today. The design of the 1988 Lincoln penny is the classic memorial reverse style. On the front, you see Abraham Lincoln facing right, a portrait originally designed by Victor David Brenner. Above Lincoln's head is the word Liberty, with the date 1988 to the right. The phrase "In God We Trust" runs along the top edge of the coin. On the back, the Lincoln Memorial stands proudly in the center, with the words United States of America and 1 cent framing the design. By 1988, the penny was no longer made of solid copper. Rising copper prices had forced the mint to change the composition earlier in the decade. The 1988 penny is made primarily of zinc, coated with a thin layer of copper. This gives it the traditional copper color, even though the metal underneath is very different from older pennies made before 1982. This change in metal is one reason collectors inspect 1980s pennies carefully. The zinc core makes these coins lighter and more prone to damage, corrosion, and bubbling under the copper plating. When you find a 1988 penny in unusually good condition, it immediately stands out from the millions that were worn down by everyday use. So why do collectors care about a 1988 no-mint mark penny at all? The answer lies not in the average coin, but in the exceptions. While most 1988 pennies are worth only face value, a small number have features that set them apart. These features can include striking errors, unusual die varieties, or exceptional condition. One of the most talked about varieties connected to this year is the so-called wide AM reverse. On most Lincoln Memorial pennies, the letters A and M in the word America on the reverse are very close together, almost touching. On some coins, however, the A and M are noticeably spaced farther apart. This difference came from a design mix-up involving proof-style dies being used for regular circulation coins. Wide AM pennies are much more commonly associated with certain years, but some collectors actively check 1988 pennies for this spacing difference. Finding one is not easy, and many people overlook it because they never think to examine the reverse closely. Errors are another reason a 1988 penny might attract attention. These can include doubled lettering, off-center strikes, clipped planchets, or weak strikes caused by worn dies. Each error tells a small story about what went wrong during the minting process, and collectors enjoy owning a coin that reflects that moment in history. Condition also matters greatly. A 1988 penny that has never circulated, with sharp details and original luster, is far less common than one that has been bouncing around in pockets for decades. Coins graded as mint state by professional grading services are especially desirable, even for modern dates like 1988. When it comes to value, honesty is important. The vast majority of 1988 no-mint mark Lincoln pennies are worth 1 cent. Even in decent condition, most sell for only a small premium, if any. However, coins with confirmed errors, rare varieties, or top-tier grades can sell for significantly more. Some error coins from this year have sold for tens or even hundreds of dollars, depending on the type and severity of the error. Collectors often point to auction listings and coin shows as proof that interest exists. Online marketplaces regularly show 1988 pennies being examined, listed, and sold, especially those with visible errors or certified grades. While these sales don't usually reach life-changing amounts, they show that demand is real when the right coin appears. If you want to identify a genuine 1988 no-mint mark penny, start with the basics. Check the date carefully and confirm there is no letter under the date. Look at Lincoln's portrait for clear details, especially in the hair and beard. Flip the coin over and study the memorial, paying close attention to the word America and the spacing of the letters. Weighing the coin can also help. A standard 1988 penny should weigh about 2.5 grams. A significant difference could indicate damage or an unusual error. A magnifying glass is one of the most useful tools you can own as a collector, allowing you to spot doubling, cracks, or unusual textures that aren't visible to the naked eye. Fake pennies are extremely rare because the value of a normal coin is so low. Instead, the real risk is misidentification. Many people mistake ordinary wear or damage for valuable errors. That's why experienced collectors recommend comparing your coin to verified examples and, when in doubt, consulting a professional. There are also some fun and surprising facts about the 1988 penny. It was minted during the final years of the Cold War, a time when the world was on the brink of major political change. While global events were unfolding, billions of small, everyday coins like this one quietly entered circulation, connecting ordinary Americans to a larger moment in history. Another interesting detail is how many of these pennies still exist today. Because they are relatively modern, large numbers remain in circulation or stored away in jars, drawers, and old piggy banks. This means new discoveries can still happen, especially as people begin looking more closely at what they already own. Collectors love the 1988 no-mint mark penny not because it is rare by default, but because it represents opportunity. It reminds people that valuable coins don't always look old or impressive. Sometimes, they look exactly like the change you receive at a grocery store. For beginners, this penny is a perfect entry point into coin collecting. It teaches the importance of details, patience, and realistic expectations. For experienced collectors, it's another date worth checking, another chance that a small anomaly might be hiding in plain sight. So the next time you come across a 1988 Lincoln penny with no mint mark, don't rush to spend it. Take a moment, turn it over, look closely, because history doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits quietly, disguised as a single cent, until someone finally pays attention. Imagine holding a penny so ordinary that you've probably spent it without a second thought. Yet under the right conditions, that same penny could quietly be worth far more than 1 cent. Today, we're taking a deep look at the 1979 no-mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin many people overlook, but collectors never completely ignore. This coin doesn't scream rarity. It doesn't shine with silver. It doesn't come from a famous mistake year like 1943 or 1955. And yet, millions of Americans still have one of these sitting in jars, drawers, or old wallets. The real question is not whether you've seen one before. The question is whether you've ever really looked at one. The 1979 no-mint mark Lincoln penny is a 1-cent coin struck by the United States Mint in Philadelphia. When a penny from this era has no mint mark under the date, it means it was made in Philadelphia, which at the time did not use a mint mark on pennies. That small missing letter is actually the first detail collectors check. By 1979, the Lincoln Memorial penny had already been in circulation for 20 years. The familiar design, Lincoln's portrait on the front and the memorial building on the back, had become a symbol of everyday American money. This was not a commemorative coin. It was made to be used, spent, and forgotten. And that's exactly why surviving high-quality examples matter today. The year 1979 itself was a time of change in the United States. Inflation was high. Gas prices were rising. Everyday Americans were feeling pressure in their wallets. Pennies were still important for daily transactions, and the U.S. Mint produced massive numbers of them to keep commerce moving. In fact, more than 7 billion pennies were struck in Philadelphia in 1979 alone. At first glance, that number makes the coin sound worthless. But coin collecting is not just about how many were made. It's about condition, details, and sometimes tiny imperfections that escaped quality control. The 1979 no-mint mark penny is made primarily of copper. Specifically, it contains 95% copper and 5% zinc, a composition the mint would soon abandon in the early 1980s. That makes this coin part of the last generation of traditional copper pennies, something collectors care deeply about today. On the front, you'll see Abraham Lincoln's profile, designed by Victor David Brenner. His initials, VDB, appear subtly on the shoulder. The date 1979 sits to the right, and the phrase "In God We Trust" arches across the top. On the back, the Lincoln Memorial stands tall, with tiny columns visible, and the statue of Lincoln seated inside, a detail many people don't notice until they look closely. So why would anyone pay more than 1 cent for a coin like this? The answer begins with condition. Most 1979 pennies were heavily circulated. They were dropped on sidewalks, scraped across counters, and tossed into change jars. Finding one today with sharp details, full original luster, and no wear is surprisingly difficult. Coins that survive in near-perfect condition are graded by professionals and can command real money. In top mint state grades, especially those graded MS67 or higher, a 1979 no-mint mark penny can sell for hundreds of dollars. In a few exceptional cases, nearly flawless examples have sold for over $1,000 at auction. These are not ordinary pocket change coins. They are survivors. Then there are errors. Error coins are where curiosity turns into excitement. Some 1979 pennies were struck slightly off-center, creating a noticeable shift in the design. Others show doubled letters, where parts of the text appear to have a shadow or extra thickness due to a misalignment during striking. There are also examples with die cracks, clipped planchets, and broad strikes that collectors actively hunt for. One well-known auction example involved a high-grade 1979 no-mint mark penny with strong doubling on the date and lettering. It sold for several $100s because the error was clear, dramatic, and verified by professional grading services. Another example with a clean off-center strike brought a similar price due to its visual appeal. Now let's talk about how to identify a real one. First, check the date. It must clearly read 1979. Then look directly under the date. If there is no letter, no D, no S, then you have a Philadelphia coin. Next, examine the color. Genuine copper pennies from this era usually have a rich brown, or red tone, depending on how they were stored. Weight is another clue. A genuine 1979 penny should weigh about 3.11 grams. If it feels unusually light or heavy, that's worth further inspection. Be cautious, though. Most fakes are not trying to imitate this specific coin because the base value is usually low. Still, altered dates and novelty copies do exist. Magnification helps. Using a simple magnifying glass, look for doubling in the numbers or letters, unusual cracks, or missing details. Authentic errors look natural, not scratched or carved. If something looks too perfect or too rough, it probably is. One surprising detail about the 1979 penny is how quickly its copper value alone has become a talking point. While it is illegal to melt U.S. coins, collectors are well aware that the copper content of Pennies 1,982 pennies often exceeds 1 cent in raw metal value. This adds an extra layer of interest and long-term curiosity around these coins. Another fun fact is that many people unknowingly saved 1979 pennies, thinking they were special because the year felt important or memorable. Those small, personal hoards are now being rediscovered in estate sales and old collections, sometimes containing pristine examples that never circulated. Collectors today love the 1979 no-mint mark penny because it represents the end of an era. It belongs to the final years of classic copper pennies, the last generation before cost-cutting permanently changed the coin. It's also affordable, making it a popular entry point for new collectors who want to learn about grading, errors, and history without spending a fortune. This coin also teaches an important lesson. Not every valuable coin looks rare at first glance. Sometimes value hides in condition, in small mistakes, or in timing. A penny that passed through millions of hands can still surprise you if it survived just a little better than the rest. So the next time you come across a 1979 penny with no mint mark, don't rush to spend it. Take a moment, tilt it under the light, look closely at the details, because even the most ordinary-looking coin can carry a story, and sometimes a quiet value that only reveals itself to those who pay attention. And if you're wondering how many other everyday coins might be hiding unexpected secrets, you're not alone. That curiosity is exactly what keeps collectors searching, learning, and looking twice at the smallest pieces of history in their hands.